it was just so painful. But again, that pain was never flagged as abnormal. So it wasn't something that, it was ever in my mind something that was abnormal.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Unison Community podcast. Today, we have a very familiar face with us, Andréanne, who is my co-founder. She was here with us on the first episode, and she is sharing her story today. So this is one of the first episodes where we are having people share an experience to be able to start conversation, help each other learn from what others have been learning in their experiences. And today we are going to talk about her experience with endometriosis. Andréanne, thank you so much for being here today.
Excited to be back on the pod and to talk about my experience.
Definitely. And we know the data. We know it's 1 in 10 women are diagnosed with endometriosis, which means that likely there are many more who are not diagnosed. But it really hits when you are on Instagram or social media and reading the comments on a post about endometriosis and seeing, wow, this is really affecting a lot of people. Of the 2,000 comments on this, like half of them are people saying they've been diagnosed or think they have it, which is really crazy to see. So can you just explain to us, first of all, what is endometriosis for those of us who don't know?
So endometriosis is linked to a hormonal, I guess it's classified as a hormonal disease that is from a higher amount of estrogen. And the way that I understand it is that what is usually the endometrium, which is in our lining of our uterus, there is some mechanism where this type of tissue is essentially growing in places that are not the uterus. These are called lesions, where this type of tissue starts to grow on the lining of the uterus on the outside, on your inside of your abdominal cavity, your bladder, your large intestine, your small intestine. That's typically where the bulk of the growths occur. But we've heard instances of endometriosis in the lungs, in growing on the nerves. And even recently, I saw that they found it in someone's wrist. I don't think that modern medicine understands how it spreads to all these different places and how we can find what is in theory what a lot of people call a gynecological disease in places that are not in, our uterus, our ovaries, or organs usually associated with gynecology. One way it gets characterized is an inflammatory disease because it creates chronic inflammation throughout your entire body, which can lead to other related symptoms, which is why people with endo often have symptoms that are similar to IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, as well as a lot of pain throughout their body.
What's interesting about what you said is that it is it sounds severe, and yet so many people can't get answers and feel dismissed by their physicians. Why do you think that is?
I think the reason why is it just becomes normalized for women to have pain. For instance, I got my period at 10 years old, so while still in elementary school.
Oh my God.
And I had very, very heavy periods. So this was I think I was out of my depths to
Right.
deal with it as a 10-year-old in an elementary school bathroom that doesn't have a tampon or a pad dispenser.
Right.
But I remember my mom saying, oof, like I've had really heavy periods when I had my early periods as well. And um, it was almost like this normalized thing of this is what women experience. This is what it's like to be a woman, to have really heavy periods, for it to be this constant thing to upkeep to take care of, because I was bleeding through like the night pads. I was bleeding through my clothes at night. So I would have to put on all these towels. And there was never a flag going on, at least in my household, that this was abnormal, that this was something that needed to be looked into. It was just, this is what being a woman and having a period means.
Mm-hmm.
And even until, I was about 11, 12, I the I would have so much pain during my periods that I couldn't go out and do regular activities. So I would skip out on my piano lessons, I would skip out on my sports activities. Like I would find a way to ask if my mom could excuse me without it being it's a period problem,
Right.
because it was just so painful. But again, like that pain was never flagged as abnormal to
Mm-hmm.
have such pain during our periods, because I think to a certain degree my mom experienced something very similar. So it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't something that, it was ever in my mind something that was abnormal. And I
Right.
think that a lot of women who have the courage to even ask, is this abnormal? Is my flow too heavy? Is this pain too much? I think often get dismissed even by
Mm-hmm.
their doctors to say, this is just what it's like to be a woman and
Right.
have a period.
First of all, I knew you during this time and I had no idea that any of this was happening. So I'm shocked right now. It's just so interesting to me as someone who works in economics too. We are expected to be productive members of society. Endometriosis is 1 in 10 women, and women are approximately 50% of the population. It's crazy that 1 in 10 of the 51% is expected to function with this debilitating pain and illness. And then you also having experienced it at 10 years old. And this is like your first time getting your period. So obviously you think, oh, maybe this is just what it is, because how would you know any better? That must have been very confusing and difficult. And you didn't have any peers really. I mean, maybe some, but very few at that age who you could actually talk to and say, hey, is this normal? And even then, I mean, I feel like it wasn't as normal to talk about your period either. But I mean, you must have felt so alone. So thank you for sharing that with us. But so you said that you didn't sense any red flags. So when was it that you were like, okay, this is not right. This is not normal.
I think it's really interesting you asked that, because I feel like to a certain degree, my story is kind of dissimilar from others in that they know that there's something wrong and
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to be heard. Whereas I did not suspect a thing. I think it was just,
Okay.
I had so normalized the pain, like always having cramps. Like I think I lived in a state of pain that was my normal, that I kind of just, dismissed it. And even this level of discomfort, every time I would go to the bathroom, for example, feeling like I hadn't completely like emptied my bladder. and feeling super bloated like all the time. Again, just feeling like this is just my normal. And I knew that I was a little different from some of my other friends, but I didn't think that it was such an abnormal thing that it was worth
Right.
talking to a doctor about. And then at the end of college, I got an IUD, and there's expected pain that comes after insertion. So I never, again, was never thinking like this pain is related to anything other than that. But I think the pain lasted longer than I think what anyone would consider normal, especially pain after having sex. But I kept brushing it off of like, oh, my body's just adjusting to this IUD.
Mm-hmm.
And then it went away, and then it was less of an issue. And then again, a couple years later, I started bleeding after sex. And I was like, that one was new. Like that one was
Okay.
different. That one
Yeah.
was a little less normal. And I remember like ready to brush it off. I told my mom about it. And she kind of paused and she said, "You should go to your doctor about that."
Yeah.
I wasn't planning on it. It was more like being so used to having my body not operate the way that I want it to. It was sort of, I was willing to just move on.
Right.
But I brought it up to my mom just out of curiosity of thinking like, is this normal? Is this okay? And
Mm-hmm.
then for her, again, from my like youth of having a period, for her to say, yes, that's normal, but then bleeding after sex is not, I was like, oh, okay, then I definitely really should go
Yeah.
see a
Yeah.
doctor about this. Um, but then I went, and I had my PCP at the time. I really loved her. She said, we have to go through the steps of crossing out the most likely. So we did some STI tests, those were negative. And we did other blood tests that could have indicated it, those were negative. And then she said, okay, let's try an ultrasound. Let's see what's going on. And I laugh because the ultrasound technician was so chatty. She was chatting, and like, just doing her job because she does it every day. She's
Yeah.
not thinking about it. But then she got silent while she was doing her scans, and I
Yeah.
knew that she found something. I was like, this woman sees something. She knows she
Yeah.
can't tell me,
She
but she
can't
was
tell
very
you.
chatty and now very silent.
You always know with them. They always are so friendly and nice, and you can always tell, okay, I'm good or not. But then it drives me nuts that they can't tell you right there and you have to wait. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and for people who don't know, the ultrasound technician is able to conduct the ultrasound, but they are not able to diagnose. That's what, either the gynecologist or whatever type of doctor you went to who will be actually reading and analyzing the imaging is able to do.
But I didn't expect it to be very serious. I thought she
Right.
found something, but she just can't tell me.
Mm-hmm.
Then I started to understand the gravity of perhaps what they had found when they asked me to like come in rather than, a quick just check your portal, your results are there. I was asked to come in for a consult, so I thought, okay, this might be a little bit more serious. But it was very quick because they just said, we suspect you have endometriosis. You have a cyst on your ovary that is
Mm.
very, I guess, presenting as endometrioma. And we are scheduling surgery for this Friday. Like that was,
Oh,
it was super just from I had a scan to I'm about to go into surgery
whoa,
in two
whoa.
days.
I'm shocked right now because I feel like sometimes it takes so long to get a surgery. But wow, that must have been very shocking. And before you go on, I also just want to say you being able to talk to your mom about this stuff is so important because how would you weren't, like you said, you weren't going to go to the doctor. So it may have been years till you got a surgery that you literally had scheduled 4 days later or a matter of days later. And so that's kind of, again, like what we're trying to do here is facilitate this conversation so that we can understand what's normal, what's not, what worked for people.
Yeah. So, like I said, I was shocked. Again, I've only had one other surgery and not serious at all. Whereas to go into a consult expecting just a quick, hey, we found this thing and this is, I was expecting either like, antibiotic, I don't know, just not a surgery, that's for sure. And I called my mom immediately saying, so they're saying that I have endometriosis, and because I have a cyst, they can already assume that it's at stage 4 because the staging of endometriosis is more on like what is visible. So by the time you have a cyst, you are either at like a stage 3 or a stage 4. So I don't know. Again, I think the staging of endometriosis is very different than the staging of cancer, but for me, it felt so serious to hear that. I think I was really freaked out.
And I have heard a lot of comparison to cancer because it is something that's growing and keeps growing until you kind of do something to stop it. Obviously, it's very different and not trying to minimize either, but it is, a lot of people are starting to kind of compare it in that way.
Yeah.
That's scary. You hear stage 4 anything and you're like, okay.
Exactly. So then, we booked the surgery. The doctors sort of walk you through what to expect in the sense that it was a laparoscopic surgery, so they explain what that is. It's with this robot. It's supposed to be minimally invasive, so rather than opening your whole abdomen, they have these what they call laparoscopes, which isn't kind of like a robot in the sense that like the doctor is working from a microscope and is maneuvering from inside, or maneuvering from outside the pieces inside that are doing excision of the endometriosis lesions.
Okay.
And I guess I should also add too that it's really important for endometriosis surgery to do excision and not ablation, because excision tries to cut into any affected tissue, whereas ablation just kind of cuts it off from the surface or like cauterizes it, and it doesn't really take out the tissue that is essentially causing harm. So I've heard, at least from other people who had ablation surgery, that it didn't do very much for them. And a lot of surgeons saying like excision is the proper way to do endometriosis surgery. So I'm at least very thankful that I had a great surgical team that did it that way. But I remember coming out of surgery and the surgeon saying that it had taken a lot longer than they had expected because there were just so many more lesions than they were expecting.
Okay.
So they had to just keep me under for longer than they thought. But confirmed that I had lesions growing on my bladder, which explained a lot of the like bladder discomfort. And she hypothesized that was probably why I never felt like I had fully emptied my bladder, because it was creating almost like a dent into the bladder itself. And I probably did have a little bit of urine left behind. And I was also at the time constantly having UTIs.
Okay.
And she suspects it's part of the reason why. But they found it all over my abdominal cavity and on my on my intestines. And yeah, I mean, what I imagined when she was explaining this to me is like you walking into a house that you're going to clean and it being like a
A mess.
complete mess, like all like you're going in there to like do one little thing and then boom, like there's just this
Right.
complete mess all over your house that they have to clean up. Um, so that I kind like I think it's like they don't know because our current ultrasound technology cannot see endometriosis. It
Oh,
it can see the cysts and sometimes it can see like a large lesion, but most of it can't capture. So that's why often they'll say like you can't be diagnosed with endometriosis without a surgery because that's how you can actually see what's going
oh,
on.
wow. Wow. Yeah, I had no idea about that. So that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm just trying to wrap my head around what you're thinking through all of this because you went from diagnosis to surgery in 4 days. You're like, what is going on? And then and then you have surgery and they're like, this was much worse than we thought. I mean, did you feel like all of the pain you felt and all of the things you've been going through since you were literally 10 years old? I mean, did you feel, I don't even know if you were able to reflect at this point. I mean, what was going through your head?
The only thing that was clicking for me because it happened so quickly was like why my abdomen always felt so hard. And like I was always at the time like naturally thin, but I could never get rid of this pouch in my abdomen that wasn't really a pouch, it was just hard.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is this? And they're like, oh well, the cyst we took out was about the size of an orange.
My gosh.
It was like on my ovary. So in my head I was thinking maybe that was related. But during this actual period, I was more so just more freaked out about
Yeah.
general anesthesia because I don't know why I have like I generally feel fine about it, but as it gets like closer and closer, it's all I
Sure.
think about.
Yeah.
So I wasn't even really thinking about like what is this disease? What are the implications? Like I was really just it was so fast to go to surgery that all I was thinking about was the surgery itself. But then after it was starting, everything was starting to click of just
Mhm.
from 10 years old to having these like massively heavy periods to being a teenager and learning how to manage it, but always being in a lot of pain constantly. Ibuprofen, I think, became like a daily thing for me. And then up to that point, and then realizing some of the added pain around sex and even just general pain, it was all just starting to line up and make sense. But I think what it did for my brain though was unlock an awareness that in some
Mhm.
ways was hard because it meant anytime I was feeling discomfort, anytime that I was in pain, anytime that I was bloated, my brain couldn't just my like go-to used to just be like, oh, like that's nothing, just ignore it. And I think I learned very well how to move on from the pain. But now that I knew that I had this condition, my brain was like, it's the endometriosis. So I became so much more
Mm.
aware of my
Yeah.
pain, of the discomfort, like that I hadn't at the time, that was so that my brain would just so quickly toss aside and say that it was nothing. My brain was now pointing to every piece of information of this is your disease showing up. So
Yeah.
I think that's why my story is quite different in the sense that a lot of people go to the doctor because they're in so much pain, because it's intolerable, because they can't live their lives. Whereas
Mhm.
I only really started noticing that after, in the sense that
Mhm.
yes, I was constantly taking pain meds, but again, it was never in my mind to say, is this abnormal? Like,
Yeah.
and I think that there's this element, even like you say, like what we're trying to do with um, with this platform is I think sometimes it's hard to know what's normal and what's not normal. And if we don't
Mhm.
talk about it, then how are you supposed to know? And
Yeah, and it's true. You can't really quantify pain. And so if you're talking, even like when you're talking to your peers, it's hard to know, like, yeah, it hurts, it hurts. How much? What is this pain scale that they always try to make you do at the doctors? Like, that doesn't really work. Everybody's body's different. So I think, like, to the extent we can have like full conversations, totally. Um, but yeah, like, how were you supposed to know? And then that's when you go to the doctors because you are depending on scientific discovery to help actually validate or find something. But if we don't have the research or the technology, then what? So it is kind of like first person accounts that we need to rely on. And I know that there's a lot of criticism of that sometimes, but sometimes it's like actually having these conversations and then being able to feel prepared to have this conversation with a physician or propose ideas, at least helps make progress, or at least I've experienced that in my life. So, and we've been working together for a while. I never knew the extent of it. So my question though is, was there any expectation going into or after the surgery that you were going to feel better? Like, did the doctors ever say to you, you're not going to be in as much pain or like anything like that? Or did you just think, okay, they're removing this thing, but my life's going to be the same? And then what did you actually end up feeling?
I think that doctors and surgeons are pretty cautious with how they word
Mm-hmm.
your expectations, but the way that they worded it was that the majority of their patients had an alleviation of symptoms after surgery,
Okay.
or that many women. I think it's this broader generalization. But because my symptoms in my brain's awareness were not that bad,
Mm-hmm.
I thought, oh, great. I'm curious what this will look like if
Mm-hmm.
I'm part of the majority that feels better. But there is a minority that doesn't feel better. And for me, actually, I felt a lot worse. And I think part of that was because of now I have this awareness of my body, I'm noticing it a lot more. So
Mm-hmm.
interestingly, I feel like the beginning of my endo problems were after surgery because I started to become more aware. And maybe it's also as I was aging and our hormones shift in our late 20s, early 30s, that my body, I think, had a really hard time essentially like calibrating to figure
Yeah.
out how to exist, and it's exacerbated by stress, and I've had a really stressful life these past 6 years. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that my symptoms unfortunately have worsened since surgery, but I don't know if it's because I'm part of the unfortunate minority. I don't know if it's because that I have more of awareness of my body now, but
Mm-hmm.
I thought if it's mostly better, then it's fine. But unfortunately, it did get worse for me after the surgery itself.
Even if it is the awareness of it, you're still in pain, and that's very valid. And but it is interesting when you know something, like a diagnosis, or learn more about what's actually happening to your body, the mind body experience. And so it is hard to kind of think about, like, is this in my head, is this real? And then also obviously how the medical system has treated many women and how women have shared their experiences. We have been dismissed historically. And I think with endometriosis, especially from people sharing their experiences online, like this is the thing that many people's brain is like trying to reconcile, like, especially when you haven't even gotten the diagnosis, like, is this actually happening? What's going on? And without getting answers. But then what you're saying is you even have the answer and you're almost knowing is making it, perhaps making it worse. But how could you know? Because now you're different. You've had the surgery. So it's like you can't, there's too many variables that are different to really understand what's going on. Have you since had, I know you said that the ultrasound can't really capture the endometriosis, but have you since had some sort of sense of what is going on since the surgery?
Yeah, well, because I started having more symptoms in the last 4 years or so, that I've really been searching far and wide for how to manage this reality. I have gone to the gynecologist here in Spain, in Barcelona, and they look on a normal ultrasound and they haven't found anything. So for years, I thought even though my symptoms are getting worse, the clinical presentation of what they're seeing,
Mm.
that it's fine, that it's like clean. And, a lot of endometriosis specialists will tell you that the clinical presentation and the symptoms are not like a one for one thing. Some people will have stage 1 and debilitating pain, and some people will be at stage 4 and not even know it, like I was. So
Mm-hmm.
there's sort of this unknown relationship between the visible of what your endometriosis looks like on an ultrasound or in surgery versus what your symptoms are and how much it is interfering with your life. So I thought that it was just this experience of endometriosis having no clinical presentation, but a lot of symptoms. So I was very focused on just the symptom management. But this summer, I was part of this clinical trial, which is trying a new, like a deeper view of an ultrasound. It's this new technology that they're essentially trialing
Oh,
to
cool.
see if they can actually see endometriosis with an ultrasound.
Oh,
And so I
amazing.
did that this summer. And it was fine. Like the like typical experience of like finally this validation happened this summer
Yeah.
because again, I'd just been told that everything's fine and, I just need to regulate my stress, have omega-3, try to reduce inflammation, eat a healthy diet, do some exercise. No, it just came down to like my lifestyle and
Mm-hmm.
not anything to do with any clinical issue. But doing this, a clinical trial, I was told by the doctor researcher that I actually have deep infiltrating endometriosis, which you can't see in a normal ultrasound. And that was so validating because, again, I was just like, I must have nothing. And it's just this
Right.
unfortunate issue of having this inflammatory disease that I'm having all these problems, but I ultimately physically am fine.
Mm-hmm.
But it was this like visual and like validation from the doctor to say, no, actually, you have deep infiltrating endometriosis. She said this could have either grown since my surgery, or it could have been a very small lesion that they couldn't see that then grew from after my surgery. So they don't know like at what point did this start or how did it come, but they were able to see that in this new technology, and that it is sort of through the central line of my abdomen, like from sort of behind the vaginal wall up until my close to where my intestines are. So it's just going right through the middle, deep within my tissues. And it was just this moment of, I knew there was something wrong. Like
Right.
I was in a lot of pain. Like even up to that point, I had no problems with like sex itself. It was just pain afterwards. Whereas like then and even now, like it's very painful to have sex. So I knew that there was something wrong because
Yeah.
I hadn't had this presentation of symptoms until recently. And then also, she noted that I also have a mild adenomyosis, which also gets talked about less frequently, but I've heard it talked about as like this sister disease in the sense that it's more about the walls of your uterine lining itself.
Okay.
So she was also able to see that with this new technology as well. So it was, again, really validating. Then she asked me if after my first surgery, well, I've only had one, but after my surgery, if I was put on any treatment.
Mm-hmm.
And I said no. I mean, the only thing that I had was the IUD, which I had before.
Mm-hmm.
And she said in a lot of the clinical trials that they've been running that if you have a treatment with like a progesterone or a progestin along with an IUD that's more localized can help maintain the growths essentially, because the only thing that can recently, the theory was that to stop the growths was menopause because it's a hormonal related disease. So it's essentially trying to quiet a lot of the hormonal cycles so that you're not growing the disease and the disease isn't presenting as painfully, because it usually is most painful during the period cycle.
I have a question because I have been hearing, I mean, like physicians kind of tell you to get an IUD to alleviate the pain because it stops you from getting your period, but not all of them, but some of them stop you from getting your period. But does it also stop the growth? I mean, what is the reason that doctors tell you to get an IUD?
I think the primary reason is to have a localized source of the progesterone because that can quiet the growth of the disease. It also, for example, the one I'm on, stop my period. So I also have a lot less cyclical pain because so I don't have as many spikes of pain. It's just more this stable pain, which I mean, for at least for me, it was something that I was willing to do because it just was so like I couldn't really live on my period very well. And I know for other women that they just don't feel very comfortable with losing their period. But for me, I was like, if this takes away my problem, like I will do it.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think that's my understanding is like this localized source of progesterone. But because it's systemic, because it reaches other parts of your body, the other theory is to take a progesterone for your systemically to also quiet the spread. And that's I heard was part of these research trials that showed that the two together are very effective for reducing the spread and I guess symptoms as well after a surgery. But I had only had the IUD.
Okay.
So it's really interesting too, because I knew about these trials because my mom, she would send me these research articles like every week, every month, telling me to go speak to my doctor to see if I could get on this progestin because I was really struggling. And I brought it up to some endometriosis specialists here, and they said that they only really give that in the most severe cases of endometriosis, which was a really interesting frame though, because if they can't see it through an ultrasound, how do they know what's most severe? And if they're not listening to me saying, I can barely get up in the day, I can't live my life, it's really impacting my quality of life and that's not severe enough, then
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what they're looking for. Like if I have to have a cyst itself or after the surgery when they can visually see what's going on. But again, it was super validating because the surgeon, like doctor researcher that was leading the clinical trial, told me that's not our state of practice here because the trial was in Canada. She said that's not our state of practice here in Canada, but I will say you do have a severe case of endometriosis. So again, it was this like validating feeling of like, I knew it. I knew there was something wrong.
But it's
And
crazy to
finally
think
have
about because the only way that you're able to prove that you are a quote unquote severe case is to go through this clinical trial, which not everybody has access to. And so they're saying, okay, you have to be severe. And then it's like, well, are you going to help me prove it or not? And that's very frustrating, but I'm glad that you were able to be a part of the clinical trial.
Yeah, I know. I think it's something that's ultimately changed my life already for the last 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've heard you bring it up multiple times. I think that's really awesome. Do you have any sense of like how the trial went? Like, is this type of ultrasound going to be more widely adopted, or like, will you get updates like that?
I'm not sure because again, I was really, really lucky. Part of the reason I got into this trial was through my mom knowing the researchers themselves.
Hmm.
But I'm not part of the full trial because what they're trying to do is follow women that they've also done the surgery on.
Okay.
I'm sort of this outlier case in the sense that I was lucky enough to have the special imaging done, but not part of this longitudinal study. But I am curious to see what the outcomes will be or what the findings will be. And I think that when we do know them, I'll definitely share them with Unison too, because
Yes.
I'm really curious to see how that comes to be. But this was also the first time that the question of hysterectomy came up as well.
Okay.
And I know you and I have kind of chatted about this. I'm not interested in having kids. So for me, the idea of not physically being able to have children wasn't necessarily it wasn't devastating, but there is this level of almost like a bit terrifying of having a whole
Yeah,
organ removed,
of course. Yeah.
um, to essentially just manage the fact that this disease is so intrusive.
Hmm.
Um, and the the way that I framed it to my doctor too was, she's like, "Have you, if your symptoms are really not improving with this new treatment?" So now I am on the progestin, and also a set of medication for neurological pain too, because when your body is used to being in so much pain, it becomes more sensitive to pain. So it's trying to calm my nervous system a little bit as well. But there was sort of, again, a warning of, not everyone responds to this treatment. And there are options that we can keep trying, but eventually, if nothing works, there is sort of this question of hysterectomy, which I suppose actually does help a lot for symptoms. I don't know anyone actually who has gotten a hysterectomy from endo, so I'm not sure what their experiences are, but that's at least how the doctors were framing it.
I have read a few online. And obviously everybody's body is different, but they have said like this was life changing for me. Like I feel so much better. And again, everybody is different, but it's been pretty astounding to read the comments about that and people kind of sharing that. But obviously, yeah, it's scary.
Yeah, and it feels so major. Even though I didn't want kids, it became like very clear of this like door that gets like completely shut. Like there is
Hmm.
no alternative, there is no turning back. And I don't even know if I'm if I have fertility issues, because it's not like I've tried. So potentially I would have not been able to conceive because of fertility issues, because endo does impact fertility. And then or just for other reasons as well. So I wouldn't have known, but there was something about knowing for sure that I would not. That was like really like, I don't know. It was like really confronted with that. And so the way I framed it was, I don't think that I want to have kids, but I don't really want to forever close that door just in case. Sure. Which was really funny because the doctor responded, well, you know, with age, that door will close on its own as well. Eventually. So that was really, really funny. But I think also with the hysterectomy, I learned they keep your ovaries in. So you do still have hormones and hormone production. It's just that the area that's causing the most problem is the best way that I think I understand it is taken out.
Well, that is a very big decision to make, and it is completely understandable that you wouldn't want to jump to that, though I know some people do, which is totally fine. But in the meantime, you are living with endometriosis. So what does that look like? It sounds like, you know, you've accepted that you have this diagnosis. You've gone through a lot of searching for answers. I know the doctors have said there's a lot about your lifestyle and like managing stress and things like that, which is obviously easier said than done. And I know we've talked about some things you are kind of working on and doing. So curious if you could share that with our listeners. How are you managing?
One of the major things that really helped me was working with a dietitian, specifically someone specialized in endometriosis. That really unlocked my ability to control a lot of the worst parts of the symptoms, because again, I'm not sure about the underlying theory here, but I think because our bodies are in such inflammatory responses, we tend to have symptoms that are very similar to IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. And so there is this diet that helps folks with IBS called a low FODMAP diet that for me also worked really, really well. And it's something that works very quickly as well.
Okay.
The thing that people get scared about is that it is a very limiting diet. Yes. But one thing that a dietitian will help you through is, of course, you do have to go through the phases of the limitation. But essentially what you then do with a dietitian is you essentially do these trials of different types of FODMAPs to see which ones your body is most reactive to. So then once you know that, it's not that you have to live this incredibly restrictive low FODMAP diet for the rest of your life. I mean, for some, I think yes. But for me, at least, it was identifying the key problem foods and then staying away from those, especially when I'm not feeling great. And if I'm feeling really bad, going into a low FODMAP diet to just try to calm everything down. So that one was a huge new tool, because I think before I would definitely roll my eyes about diet, because trying to eat healthy, I don't think that's the point. It's not about healthy or not healthy. It's about what your body is reacting to. So that was a huge unlock for me. And then also doing physio. So I go to a pelvic floor physiotherapist once every week to help manage my pain and symptoms for my pelvic floor area. And that's also made a really big difference as well. I specifically go to a physiotherapist that also uses this new technology called Indiba, which was actually created for athletes like who are recovering from injury. It's using some sort of like radio frequency to help with recovery.
Okay.
But it's been really effective as well for my endo, because part of endo is also like the growth of fibroids and sort of almost like the scar-like tissue. And also with endo, our fascia gets stuck. So our organs are meant to slide, like a healthy
Yeah.
tissue will slide across itself. But with endo people, it gets stuck, like it doesn't move, which is
Oh,
part of why we have pain.
yeah.
So, because essentially it's like when you move it, you're like literally ripping tissue apart from itself. So it's helpful for that. It like makes my tissues a little bit more slippery, and it has been very effective for a lot of my physical hard belly symptoms and
Yeah.
pain.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that because I think sometimes it's questionable whether like some of these things can actually be helpful. So it's good to hear that they're helpful for certain people. And I have heard people doing a low FODMAP diet for a variety of reasons. And just an explanation is it's basically a diet that provides a guide to eliminate certain types of carbohydrates that are more difficult to digest, which is why it helps with IBS and for some people endometriosis. But it is a lot of work. All the things you described, I mean, that's a lot of work. Like that, you are really working to feel better. And this is, you're a very busy person. You have to make time in the day. You have to obviously grocery shop a certain way, make meals a certain way, make time to go to the pelvic floor therapist, make your appointments with your dietitian. Like this is all extra stuff that a lot of other people don't have to do. But obviously it's helpful for you. If you haven't to this point, which I hope you have, understood the type of pain that she's felt, hopefully by now, seeing all the time and effort she's investing in feeling better. I just wanted to ask, I know your experience was different, but like what advice could you give someone who is searching for answers, someone who suspects they might have endometriosis?
I think the first is believing yourself, like not letting anyone else who says that it's normal, if you don't feel like it's normal, tell you otherwise. And then trying to find folks either in your life in person or online, like Unison, who will hear you and validate you and support you. Because I think that if everyone around you is telling you it's normal, eventually you'll just decide that it is, or you'll feel ashamed about expressing the challenges that you're having. And then, and this is obviously easier said than done, finding a specialist who will
Yeah.
also hear you out too. Finding a doctor who takes the time to actually understand what you're experiencing and trying to find solutions for you, or, doing that investigative work to find out what's wrong. And it's not going to often show up in your blood test. It's not going to show up even in your normal ultrasound. So trying to find someone who's in your corner, which I think I really had with my PCP that time, which I'm not really finding over here. And right now I have the privilege to work a little bit with the doctors in Canada that I was part of the trial with. But again, like not everyone has that access. So it is one of those things that I think requires like searching and searching. And hopefully by talking to other people who've had similar experiences, maybe we can identify the specialists who are in our
Yeah.
areas who actually will hear us. I think that that's one thing that I'm hoping to do too with these platforms is say anyone else in this region who's had a really good experience with a gynecologist who like hears them and is really supporting them.
And I mean, I do truly believe that advocating for yourself and getting this diagnosis or getting an explanation for what is causing your pain is also advocating for others, because the more they hear us, the more we're having conversations. I didn't know what endometriosis was when I was in high school or college, but the more that people hear us, the more we're kind of spreading the word, the more people will be like, you know what, I want to be the person to cure this, or I want to go into this field because I know there are people with endometriosis and I don't know anyone who growing up was like, I want to be a doctor because I want to help, cure endometriosis, so we need to make people more aware. This affects 1 in 10 women, and we are literally half the population. So I think in advocating for yourself and just being the squeaky wheel, we need to be like 1,000,000 squeaky wheels, 2,000,000 squeaky wheels. The more that we're talking about it and they're realizing that people are really struggling to just basically function, a lot of people, the more I believe that we'll get focus on this. Just having it more known is powerful. And anyway, I just want to thank you so much for sharing this story. I know it's probably not easy reliving a lot of the stuff you've gone through for the past 20 years at this point. It was really nice to hear your full story, to learn more about endometriosis and how it's diagnosed. And I wish you wellness on your journey. And we know that talking is very therapeutic. And so we are hoping to start kind of groups and sessions where we can just share and talk about anything relating to a diagnosis that you have, or, a health challenge that you're experiencing. So we look forward to facilitating more conversation, and we hope you'll join the conversation as well on unisoncommunity.com. And we're also on Instagram at Unison Community, where we're starting to facilitate conversation there too. And yeah, again, thank you so much, Andréanne.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Unison Community podcast. As a reminder, the information shared in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. This content is not a substitute for professional or medical diagnosis, treatment, or advice. Always seek the guidance of your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions that you may have regarding your health or medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking it because of something you heard on this podcast or read on the website. Thank you again for being a part of our community, and we hope to hear from you soon.